Chapter 10. Domain Infrastructure Overview. This is the final chapter, and it's where everything connects. Over the past 9 weeks, John's class has learned about hardware, operating systems, software, virtual machines, networking, Linux, the internet, cloud storage, and cybersecurity. In this chapter, they see how all of those pieces fit together in a real-world organizational environment. Every time you log into a school or workplace computer, something is checking who you are, deciding what you're allowed to access, and applying a set of rules to your session, all in the seconds before your desktop appears. That something is Active Directory, running on a domain controller. Key concepts: IT infrastructure, domains, Active Directory, domain controllers, group policy, server types, on-premises versus cloud versus hybrid infrastructure, and how a student login event touches every layer of the system. Let's bring it all together.
Week 10, the last week. You drew a diagram on the board, a box labeled domain controller in the middle, lines going out to every computer in the school, a server box, a cloud shape in the corner labeled Azure and Microsoft 365. And you said every time you log into a school computer, you're not logging in to that computer, you're logging into a domain.
And most people have never thought about what happens behind that login screen, but quite a lot is happening. Let's start with the big picture, what IT infrastructure actually is.
IT infrastructure is the complete system of hardware, software, networks, and services that an organization uses to store, process, and manage information. Physical cables in the walls, servers in a room, cloud services online, all of it together.
Physical hardware, software systems, networks, services, and cloud resources, the backbone that makes an organization's technology work. Now, domains and Active Directory. This is the core of how Windows-based organizations manage their users and computers.
A domain is a group of computers managed centrally by a domain controller. Rather than each computer having its own separate user accounts and settings, the domain controller applies a consistent set of policies to every machine on the network.
Active Directory is Microsoft's directory service that makes this possible. It's a database that stores every user account, every computer account, every group, and every policy. When you type your school username and password, the domain controller checks Active Directory, verifies your credentials, and decides what you're allowed to access.
You compared Active Directory to the HR department of a company. It knows every employee, what department they're in, what they're allowed to access, and the rules they must follow. When someone starts, HR sets up their access. When they leave, HR removes it.
And that analogy holds precisely. User accounts, group memberships, permissions, policies, all managed centrally. One change in Active Directory affects every machine the moment a user logs in.
Group policy. That was the discovery that explained so much about school computers.
Group policy objects, GPOs, are sets of rules the domain controller applies to users and computers. That's why you can't install software on school machines, why the desktop wallpaper is locked to the school logo, why certain websites are blocked, why network drives appear automatically when you log in. It's not the individual computer doing any of that. It's instructions from the domain controller applied the moment you authenticate.
I remember thinking, it's like discovering the wizard behind the curtain was just a very organized IT department.
Which is a reasonable description. Let's talk about servers, because the domain controller is one type of server, and there are several others an organization typically runs.
A server is a computer that provides services to other computers on the network. File server stores and shares files, print server manages shared printers, web server hosts websites and web applications, email server handles email, DHCP server assigns IP addresses to devices, DNS server resolves domain names.
Servers are typically more powerful, more reliable, and designed to run continuously. They're housed in a server room with proper cooling, power protection using an uninterruptible power supply, and physical security.
Then, on Friday, you covered on-premises versus cloud versus hybrid, which connected everything we learned about cloud storage back to the bigger infrastructure picture.
On-premise means all servers and services run on hardware physically in the organization's building. Full control, full responsibility. for maintenance, security, updates, and hardware costs. Cloud means services run on hardware owned by a provider, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, or Amazon AWS. You access it via internet. You pay as you go. The provider handles the hardware.
The car analogy. On-prem is owning a car. Full control, you maintain it, upfront cost. Cloud is a taxi service. Pay per use, someone else handles maintenance.
And hybrid is owning a car for daily use, but taking taxis for airport trips. Most modern organizations run a hybrid model. Sensitive or regulated data stays on-premise for control and compliance, while less critical services move to the cloud for flexibility and cost savings.
You walked us through what actually happens when a student logs into a school computer. Every step. The credentials go to the domain controller over the LAN, the DC checks Active Directory. If valid, it authenticates the user and sends group policy settings. Windows applies them. Network drives map. Software restrictions activate. Personalized desktop appears. All in under 10 seconds.
10 weeks of knowledge all flowing together in one login event. That's the point of building understanding rather than just memorizing facts. When you see how the pieces connect, you can reason about systems you've never seen before.
You ended the course by looking at us all and saying, 10 weeks ago, most of you couldn't explain what a CPU does. Today, you understand hardware, operating systems, virtual machines, networking, Linux, the internet, cloud computing, cybersecurity, and enterprise infrastructure. That's not nothing.
And it isn't. That's a genuine foundation, not mastery, but understanding. And understanding is where everything else starts.
Then you said, now go and do something interesting with it.
And I meant it. The knowledge is only valuable if you use it. Build something, break something and fix it. Ask questions. Keep going.
And there it is, the full picture. Hardware, operating systems, software, virtual machines, networking, Linux, the web, cloud services, cybersecurity, and enterprise infrastructure. 10 weeks, 10 chapters, one coherent picture of how modern computing actually works. The most important thing isn't any individual concept, it's the way they connect. The LAN carries the login request to the domain controller. Active Directory holds the user's credentials. Group policy shapes the session. The cloud handles collaboration. Cybersecurity keeps it all protected. Everything you've learned in this book is a piece of the same system. John went from someone who didn't put his hand up when the teacher asked who knew how computers work, to someone who diagnoses his mum's laptop using Task Manager and plans to sit his CompTIA A certification over the summer. That's not a small thing. In the epilogue, we find out what happens next, for John and for anyone who's made it this far. Because finishing a book like this isn't the end, it's the starting point. The epilogue is up next.